Hello, everybody. Welcome to our seminar today, Altamimi in collaboration with the DIFC. We're going to be talking about the DIFC and its place in the legal environment that we're involved with in the UAE, and how it can benefit families when they're considering how to structure their wealth. I think we're just going to give another 45 seconds to a minute just to make sure that if there are any joiners that haven't joined yet, that they have the opportunity to start from the beginning, and then we'll kick off. So if we start then the session, welcome everybody. We're very excited to have an hour to spend in the company of Khadija Ali from the DIFC. And we are going to be talking to you about how the DIFC figures centrally in many aspects of what we as lawyers are doing in Dubai and the UAE and the wider region, when we're advising family businesses as to how they can best structure and provide for the future of their family business and their private wealth holdings. To introduce myself, my name is Richard Catling. I'm a partner at Altamimi in our corporate finance team, and as I say, specifically focusing quite a lot on family business, which is a specific practice area that we have at Altamimi. The reason we have it is because family businesses are such an important component part of the economy in the UAE and the wider region, and they all have their specific issues, such that actually it's an area of a specialism for lawyers like myself to think about how best to provide for corporate structures and other issues surrounding how they preserve and grow their wealth and businesses. I'm joined today by Nawal Abdul Hadi, a senior associate in our team, who I work very closely with. We're in the middle right now of a number of major projects where we're talking to families about exactly the sort of issues and looking at exactly the sort of structures that we'll be talking to you about today. And then, as I mentioned earlier, also we're fortunate to be joined by Khadija Ali, who heads up the business development offering at the DIFC, and she's been there 15 years, so obviously has seen the DIFC really grow and expand its reach and optionality that's now available to families and other businesses who want to set up and use the DIFC as a hub for everything that they're doing in the wider region. So if we can move to the first slide on the presentation. What we'll be doing is talking about some of the issues and what exactly it is that families need to be aware of and what they need to resolve in order to ensure that those businesses and private wealth holdings are best set up and best operated. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that families can face. After that, Nawal will segue into what exactly it is that the DIFC can do to mitigate and actually provide solutions for some of the questions that I'll be posing in relation to what family businesses need to think about. And then after that, we'll go even to another level of granularity, and Khadija can talk about exactly what the offerings are that the DIFC can provide to family businesses and wealth structures, and we'll go through those in some detail. After that, there's a couple of other points that we want to touch upon, talking a little bit more about the regulatory environment in which the DIFC sits and what we see as the sort of progress towards a more liberal approach to the utilization of DIFC structures, and also just thinking more conceptually about a couple of issues. Plus, obviously, the opportunity is always there for anyone to ask any questions that they have. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but I have the Q&A box, and to the extent that there is a question that's relevant at the point in time that we're talking about a particular topic, then I'll try and address that now. We've already had one question, which is whether the copies of the slides will be available. I think so. We should be able to circulate those to anyone that would like them afterwards. But if we start then, so I mean, I think everyone realizes just how important family businesses are to the economy. I mean, if you look at the statistics, it's something like 80% of the wealth generation and economic activity that happens in the UAE is derived from family-owned businesses, which is obviously a very high proportion of the total economy. And it's a little different from, what it sets this part of the world apart maybe from Western and American economies where that's not necessarily the case. Obviously, there are some very high-profile family businesses all around the world that have significant stakes in many businesses, but the concentration of them here is almost unique to this part of the world. But the issue with family businesses is that fundamentally there is a nexus between the business and the family, which you don't have in a publicly listed traded entity, for example, because the way publicly listed traded entities are set up are with a certain goal in mind, which is to realize shareholder value, and in that sense have very strict governance measures and other regulatory restrictions that are in place to ensure that that's exactly what happens. But with family-owned businesses, given that they're in private hands, those same regulatory checks and balances are not there. So what that means is that a family business can look like, can end up looking very different from the next family business, and each of them can have their unique and potentially critical issues, which could have serious ramifications as to the ongoing health and well-being of that family. And fundamentally, as I've already mentioned, it's that nexus between the family itself and the business, because those interests are not necessarily aligned, because in any family, obviously we all would love to get on very well with our family members, and in 9 times out of 10 we do, but there's always the opportunity for internal squabbling, arguments, friction to develop, which could have serious ramifications for the underlying business if it is family-led and run. So really what we're doing as lawyers is trying to provide a structure and a framework in the absence of those corporate governance rules, which might be present and available in a publicly listed business. We're trying to impose those same sorts of regimes in respect of a family business, but also providing for a legal structure that actually can survive the comings and goings of the family and the issues that the families and the arguments that the families may come up, may have to resolve at any point during the life of the family. Also, of course, the family is not a unmoving, unchanging organism. Obviously, family members come and go as with the passage of time. The interests in family businesses can pass from one generation to another, and it's those succession events which can also often be really critical moments for any family business. So basically what I'm saying is planning in succession planning in family-owned businesses is imperative. And it's the absence of that which can result in all of the issues that can arise and that can lead to the fragmentation or the disruption, or in some ultimate cases, the ultimate failure of the family business. And what do I mean by succession planning, or what does it mean to a lawyer, and what we would be doing? Well, what we really are talking about is having an effective legal structure in place through which the family can enjoy the benefits of and maintain the governance and retention of the family business wealth. And quite often with, as you can imagine, families in this region, that is a conglomeration of a number of different aspects of family business. Quite often these families have very large organizations which do a lot of things, and that can also include then significant private wealth as well. So as I say in the last bullet point, really what we're talking about is corporatizing a structure and making sure it looks like a well-ordered and well-structured family business. If we could move to the next slide. So here are just a little bit, some of the key issues that we can face in the region. And quite a lot of this is due to the fact that the existing UAE onshore legal environment does not necessarily lend itself particularly well to large companies in private hands. So I'm not talking about publicly listed companies now, because the corporate laws that are in place are relatively inflexible, or at least, as we'll go on to see in the rest of the presentation, do not necessarily present best practice when compared with other potential ways of regulating companies. So in addition to that, obviously we are in a Islamic environment with the Sharia principles, and in the case of the UAE, enshrined in the personal status law. So the inheritance laws that also apply to the retention and inheritance of family wealth can also have an issue in relation to a family business. Because if you imagine, most family businesses are set up by one founder, one patriarch usually, though we know some very well-run businesses that are run by women in Dubai, so we're definitely not gender specific here. But there's normally one titular head, there's one person in control, but quite often the next generation is made up of a number of different family members. It's a cultural thing in this part of the world that families tend to be quite large. Obviously, when they have a lot of people all arguing, or potential more voices all wanting to have their voices heard, that can result and provide for the opportunity for argument. So again, that succession passage from the founder to the next generation, it's key to get that right. Different people come with different points of view. If you don't have a structure in place, those different impetuses and views and reflections are going to result in friction, and really that's what we want to avoid. As I've mentioned, the standard LLC, which 90% of businesses are incorporated through in the onshore Dubai, is governed by the CCL, and the CCL is relatively, whilst it's been updated recently, it was originally formulated quite a long time ago, and it works very well with LLCs that are run as operating businesses to do certain activity and to pass the economic benefit in that activity up to a small number of key shareholders. But when you expand that out and start talking about conglomerates and talking about family businesses that are owned by a very large number of families, it doesn't really provide for a very good solution for that. So in addition, the provisions of the company's law are relatively restrictive and don't offer some of the key flexibilities that a well-structured family business needs in order to operate successfully. In addition to all of that, the way that businesses are often structured and the way that they are grown organically over time, which has been the history of family businesses over the last 3-4 decades in the region, they have grown from very small beginnings to what they now are, which is very successful large companies. They have grown organically, so quite often they're not necessarily structured in the right way and have lacked that foresight in thinking, well, how would we best structure this business? How can we best impose corporate governance arrangements to ensure that decisions are taken in a seamless, efficient manner? And quite often you're also finding, businesses that are still reliant on the founder in his personal capacity, whether that's in terms of, bank facilities, personal guarantees, a lack of limitation of liability because perhaps he's got sole establishment, businesses established as sole establishments next to an LLC. And so all of this is crying out for a proper, well-ordered corporate structure. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So if that's where we are, and if that's the sort of experience that most family businesses have in the region, what are we doing? What are we trying to do to provide and ensure for the future success of that business? Well, as I've mentioned before, really what it comes down to is selecting the right corporate structure. In doing so, not only are we looking at the top of the structure, but we're also looking at how best to regularize and potentially compartmentalize different aspects of the business to ensure that they're run in a successful manner, and so that those elements of the business will rise and fall off the back of their own endeavors without necessarily resulting in an issue for the wider business as a whole. And then on top of all that, obviously, and again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning, the nexus between that well-structured business and the family itself is the key part of any appropriately ordered family business structure. So how do the family members actually share in the wealth that the business generates? How do they come and go? How do they interact with the business? And what you need there is an efficient means of producing a binding legal arrangement. And what you need is potentially one of a number of different ways of doing that. But fundamentally, in order to do this, we would say that the optimal solution is to move to the common law holding environment. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case for all families and that it works in all cases, or that it's even appropriate in every single case. But there are some key advantages in doing a structure through a financial holding, a free zone of the type of that the DIFC represents really as the optimal example of, in Dubai. And so that's what we want to go on to talk about now in a bit more detail. What is it that the DIFC can do for a family, and how can the family utilize the DIFC as a place to actually hold their underlying assets and business in a way to really represent best practice, so that they know that going forward the family is going to be well served by that corporate structure. So I'm going to pass over to Nawal now, who's going to look at things from the DIFC perspective and say, okay, well, if here's a family and here's a business, knowing what we know potentially could be the issues that that family could face, how do we solve them by using the DIFC?
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. So why the DIFC, and how can the DIFC complement a well-structured family business? The DIFC is considered a flexible environment for holding structures for families and business. It is considered a superior environment to that of the onshore civil law-based jurisdiction. It's based on common law. It's a common law jurisdiction. It's governed by a separate set of civil and commercial rules and regulations supported by well-settled, relatively certain common law of England. So the DIFC offers sophisticated structures that provide for checks and balances and create an ownership structure for families to survive transition, to protect their assets, and to mitigate and face and solve those challenges and pitfalls that Richard talked about. It provides the flexibility for family business to tailor-make their arrangements and governance as they deem fit and appropriate. The DIFC allows trust structures to be the basis for company and asset holding arrangements of the type available in other common law jurisdictions. It provides a self-contained legal system which permits the establishment of trust relationships, and those relationships, rights, and obligations under the structure can in turn be enforced under the DIFC trust. DIFC foundations have recently been introduced as well by the DIFC, and foundations is a perpetual concept allowing arrangements to continue through time, which provides certainty after a founder's death or transitioning from one generation to another. They are actually recommended structures specifically in the context of succession planning, because they are orphan entities and have no ultimate legal owners to disturb the foundation's purpose. So they enjoy utmost flexibility in achieving the wishes of the founder or the family members. This flexibility is not limited to trusts and foundations structures offered by the DIFC. It also extends to companies, non-regulated companies limited by shares, specifically in comparison to limited liability companies, which are established onshore in light of the commercial companies law. As Richard said, the companies law imposes certain restrictions on limited liability companies, which means that certain desired comprehensive arrangements cannot be implemented satisfactorily under the onshore jurisdiction. One of the key elements, for example, for families is the exit mechanism, and how do they deal with an exit of a shareholder, of a family member. The commercial companies law provides for a prescribed mechanism for the exit of any shareholder. It does not provide, or it does not allow limited liability companies, for example, to buy back its shares, whereas this option is available under the DIFC, where the company buys the shares of the exiting shareholder. Example is the valuation process, where the commercial companies law sets a restrictive valuation process in terms of any exit for any shareholder or family member. This can be tailor-made as per, or the valuation process and exit mechanism can, on the other hand, be tailor-made to suit and achieve the family's objective under a DIFC structure. So in summary, the DIFC provides... Yes.
I was just going to say, Noel, I mean, in terms of exit structures, I mean, you don't want to think about the worst case scenario, but actually it's probably one of the key aspects of a well structured family structure, which is, you know, if families do want to go their separate ways, and if there is, you know, black sheep or whatever, anyone doesn't necessarily want to decide that they want to continue in the family business, it's really key, isn't it, that they have the opportunity to actually exit, because in the absence of that, if they feel restricted, you know, their only avenue they might find is to try and, you know, enter into dispute, you know, through a court process or otherwise, and that can have a really serious effect on the longevity of the business as a whole.
Definitely, yes, Richard, and you know, the flexibility offered by the DIFC is a key element in this regard, because there are certain arrangements, certain components, objectives that the families need to ensure are entrenched and legally binding arrangements in their structures in order to ensure the continuity of the business and the protection of its assets. In summary, yes, the DIFC provides options that are well suited to establishing enduring and cohesive legal structures for families in business. The DIFC, as I said, sorry.
To interrupt again, sorry, Noel, I keep interrupting you. But,
no problem.
I mean, I think it's really key just to focus on just how flexible, you know, the arrangements are, you know, in whether that's a corporate structure, foundation, trust. I mean, I often tell clients, you know, specifically in relation to trusts as well, that pretty much, you know, not literally everything, but pretty much anything that you want to say and think about and provide for in your legally binding documents for your particular family and its particular requirements, you know, you can put those in the documents that are going to bind the company and the family going forward. And that's a really unique aspect of corporate structuring that you know, we couldn't replicate onshore, because what we might have to say onshore is, okay, we can put that in the shareholders agreement, for example, but we can't guarantee with complete certainty that that will be enforceable, and that's always an issue. I mean, that's also really the key problem that families face when trying to duplicate their family constitution or other unwritten code that they have between them, putting that in the legal environment. And we have to say, oh, well, we can't quite do that. We can try and do it, or we can replace that with this, which looks a bit like it. But in order to have that complete flexibility, and obviously you've made this point already, but you know, it really is the key advantage of doing it in the DIFC is, you know, you can literally come up with whatever arrangements you want, because there's so many tools available to you. I mean, classes of shares, for example, Noel.
Yes, yes, definitely. And maybe it's very important to note in this aspect is that under the structures available in the DIFC, you can have a well-designed structure that respects also Sharia principles. So it's a Sharia compliant structure. However, at the same time, it mitigates risks and it solves the challenges and the issues and pitfalls of the family businesses.
Yeah, so we've had a question, which I think, you know, exactly on that topic. Maybe we can quickly address it now. I'm conscious of time, but yes. We need to get to Khadija's section. But how can trusts and foundations be used where the family wants Sharia principles to apply? Well, I mean, I think you've just answered that, but just 20 seconds from me, you know, there's nothing particularly inherently difficult or contradictory between a trust and a foundation and the Sharia environment, the important Sharia rules of inheritance. The important thing is to document it in a way so that it is indeed Sharia compliant. And you can do that in a trust. You can do that in a foundation. If the documents provide for how the family are going to inherit in line with the requirements of the personal status law and those inheritance rules, then that is a Sharia compliant vehicle. And, you know, we are regularly documenting things in that way.
Yes, definitely. So to pass to Khadija now, who will take us through the different options in more details offered by the DIFC.
Thank you very much, Nawal. As many of you know, Dubai International Financial Center was established back in 2004. Today, we are one of the world's largest and most leading international global financial center, and we are the largest and the most established global financial hub in the region. Today, we have more than 25,000 professionals working in the DIFC across more than 2,500 companies who are established in the center. And of course, talking about family businesses are considered an integral part of the DIFC community. And companies which are established in DIFC, of course, they benefit from so many advantages. For example, we don't have restriction on foreign ownership. We allow 100% foreign ownership, which is actually a restriction in the mainland of UAE. The second thing, when it comes to the national identity, DIFC established companies can be the UAE national ID and as well as the GCC national treatment. For example, companies incorporated in DIFC, we can benefit from the UAE double taxation treaties. More than that, in the DIFC, we have our independent regulator, DIFC, and our own judicial establishment with, courts with track record. One of the key advantages of establishing in DIFC is the flexibility and no restriction on profit or capital repatriation. And of course, this is very important for families and for investors. With the talent, DIFC, actually, we have our own employment law and we don't have any restriction in terms of hiring of overseas, market talent. If we can move to the next slide, please. Can we move to the next slide, please? Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. The previous one, please. No, the previous slide, please. One more. One more slide. Can we? Yes. Okay. Okay. Talking about the other advantages of being in the DIFC, in the financial center, actually, we have sophisticated laws and regulations. This actually involves the regulatory framework and infrastructure, which includes the laws and regulations. For example, in the DIFC, we have the trust and foundation law, we have the single family law, data protection law, insolvency law, intellectual property laws. Of course, all these kind of laws and regulations are very important for families because based on that, they will know how they will manage that legal entity and how they will be operating it and which kind of rights these kind of legislation will be protecting. More than that, the DIFC actually have different kinds of structures. Earlier, we have, for example, the single family offices, holding companies, proprietary investment, foundation, prescribed companies, as well as the trust arrangement, which can also be in DIFC. And I would love to show you later some examples of these kind of structures and how these can be used. Furthermore, companies which are established or entities in DIFC, especially family businesses, can enjoy what's available in the ecosystem in the financial center. And that includes, for example, the availability of the practitioner, the advisors in the center, including, for example, the lawyers, the succession planning advisors, the wealth and asset management managers, treasury experts, and so many others. So let me show you some examples which will give you flavor how can family businesses structure their wealth in DIFC and how they can choose from those different options. So if we can go to the next slide, please. One more slide, please, where we can see the chart. One more slide. Yes, this is actually an example of how family businesses, they can structure their wealth in the DIFC using a DIFC company structure. As you can see in this diagram, you will find a top DIFC legal entity which can act as a company structure rather than another form of legal structure, let's say partnership. And in this top legal entity, the family business can have different kind of arrangement. In this example, you will find that we have different shareholders with different percentage of ownership. Back to what Nawal was mentioning earlier, in the DIFC, family businesses can have some arrangements. For example, in the articles of association, they can select that they can have 2 classes of shares. For example, in this example, which is in front of you, shareholder A can have, although he or she is minority shareholder, can have Class A with voting power, while, for example, shareholder B, although being a majority shareholder, can be without voting power with Class B. Other than this, because of this, company structure arrangement, the shareholders can also opt to go for more sophisticated arrangement of having shareholder agreement to stipulate in it their wish list and what they would like to do with investment or with the group of companies and who will be involved in this legal entity. And of course, shareholder agreement, will make it binding for the shareholders, whatever is stated in the agreement. In the DIFC, for the top DIFC legal entity, which is a company structure, the family can select different kind of activities. For example, option 1, the family can select the DIFC entity to act as a managing office. And as managing office, as the name suggests, the legal entity, this establishment, can manage and oversee and administer the group of companies. And of course, services such as treasury function, legal, compliance, and many other functions can be extended to the group of companies. In the same license, the client can opt to add the holding company activity, which will enable them to hold shares of companies and subsidiaries. Furthermore, the same license, the family can choose to add the proprietary investment activity, and we have a variety of sectors which we allow the client to invest in, and we don't have restrictions on which type of investment can be handled under the DIFC entity or where those investment will be or the group of companies, and hence the investment can be in education, industrial, agriculture, commercial. So there are so many kind of industries or also segments where the family can choose to have. As you can see, it's also in this diagram, this is actually, we're talking about the top legal entity. What about the group of companies, how we can structure it? This is what you will find in the second layer, what I named it as PC, and this is abbreviation for prescribed companies. Prescribed companies in DIFC can be used again as holding companies, management office, and proprietary investment. And this is actually, this kind of tools enable families to structure their wealth based on industries or geography or specific type of investment. And this is actually cost-effective kind of holding companies because actually for those type of structures, the family will only need to pay for the license $1,000 US. So we have provided this kind of tools for family in order for them to consolidate the structure in one jurisdiction to make it much easier for them to structure the group. So this is the first option which the family they can have under the company structure, but the second option is to go for the single family office. So what is the difference over here? Single family office, they can act as a managing office, can also hold shares of subsidiary, and can do proprietary investment. However, single family office, because they are subject to the DIFC single family office, the shareholders, as per the DIFC legislation, should be members of the same family. So there is a restriction by law that the shareholders at any point of the time from the inception of the SFO that they should be family members. The second thing, which usually the single family office will do, providing services to the family, which includes, for example, concierge services to the family members. So this is the second option, which is also available for family businesses as a top legal entity under company structure. So let's show you another example. If we can move to the next slide. Here we have more sophisticated arrangement, which is trust. Trust, as you know, it is an arrangement which enables the family to have their trust deed, where they stipulate in it their wish list, and of course for that they can work with the advisors, to have the trust deed in place. It is a document which doesn't need even to be filed or registered with the DIFC authority. And in the trust arrangement, as you can see, it is an arrangement where the trustee actually will be the legal owner, and they will pass the ownership from the beneficiaries to the trustee. So this is another kind of arrangement available also for families in case they want more sophisticated kind of arrangement rather than normal company structure with only, let's say, constitutional document being articles of association and shareholder agreement. Let's move to the another example. This is actually the DIFC foundation structure. And the DIFC foundation structure, as you can see, it is orphan legal entity, and in this legal entity, you will not find shareholders. Some of the family businesses, they don't prefer the trust arrangement because they don't like to segregate the legal ownership from the beneficiary, and hence they prefer to go for foundation structure. In the foundation structure, of course, it has its own set of documents like the charters, bylaws. You will have also to specify who will be the beneficiary, or what we call them qualified recipient. We can have also the council who will be administering the foundation and will fulfill their duties based on what's mentioned in the constitution document. Also in the foundation, you can have guardian, to oversee if the councils themselves are doing their duties as mentioned in the constitution document. So this is another arrangement which is available for family businesses. As you have seen in all these examples, that family businesses, they can choose multiple options and tools to structure their group of companies. However, the question is, which kind of structure is more suitable for families? This is ultimately will depend, as Richard has mentioned earlier, about the family. What is their vision? What do they want? What is their direction? Or things which they don't want. For example, some of the families, they don't like to segregate the legal ownership from beneficiaries, which means trust will definitely not be the choice for them. It means that they have to go for other options. Of course, this is not the only thing which families would need to take into consideration. There are so many other things the family would need to consider, and this is actually what Nawal will be discussing in the next slide.
Thank you, Khadija. So basically, as Khadija said, the DIFC offers many options. There is no one-size-fits-all option. Each family has its own vision, its own dynamics. So there are many elements and considerations that any family should take into consideration when deciding what is the most feasible structure to achieve its objects. What are these considerations? Well, number one, we should look at the assets that are intended to be consolidated and owned by the group holding structure. What are these assets? Are they active? Are they passive? Are they shares? Are they real property? Where is the jurisdiction of such assets? Do they fall within the GCC, where we have local ownership restrictions, business licensing rules? Are they onshore? Are they offshore in a free zone area, for example? Same applies to the real property. Where do they fall? Are they freehold property? Are they onshore? Are they granted property? What is the transfer cost and other processes for the transfer of these properties? as Khadija said, what are the family arrangements desired? What is the governance desired? What is the vision of the family? Are they thinking of any sophisticated or comprehensive arrangements in relation to the exit mechanism, in relation to having different voting rights, different entitlements under the structure for different family members? What activities does the business undertake? Are they regulated activities? Are they activities that require or have specific ownership restrictions, specific requirements such as track record? The costs of the structure is another element. Identifying and comparing the costs between the DIFC onshore or DIFC Cayman, for example, or any other offshore jurisdiction. And finally, tax is also a very important aspect when considering the most feasible structure for any family business. Can we move to the next slide, Joanna, please? Sorry.
Go ahead, Noel. Move to the next slide.
So basically, with the DIFC in the UAE regulatory environment, and basically how to look at the DIFC. Basically, we have the Cabinet Resolution number 28 of 2007, which confers DIFC entities that are wholly GCC owned with GCC nationality. And hence, regulators now in the UAE are being comfortable and accepting DIFC entities and DIFC structures as or in the ownership structures of assets comprising of shares in companies and real property. The treatment in the GCC is all.
I mean, I think just maybe this is a good opportunity just to address generally a number of questions. I've been furiously typing away and trying to answer as many questions as I can whilst you both have been speaking. But I think a common theme sort of runs through the questions, which is how does the DIFC fit into the larger environment? And when I say the larger environment, I mean onshore, but also internationally. So the questions have been, you know, could a DIFC company be owned by or have a Liechtenstein foundation above it, for example? How does the DIFC court judgments interact with the onshore Dubai courts when it comes to enforcement? What about BVI? You know, so I mean, I think, you know, in a way, DIFC people are looking at the DIFC and seeing it as its own distinct entity that, you know, trying to fit, you know, like a jigsaw piece into the larger picture. But I think, as you've mentioned, specifically with that cabinet resolution, I mean, it's quite key for everyone to understand that the DIFC is part of the UAE legal environment. It doesn't sit apart from it. It's a component part of it. It's part of, for example, the DIFC court is part of the Dubai court system. And nowadays, if it wasn't always the case, but nowadays, you know, if you get a DIFC court judgment, you should be able to expect to enforce it in the Dubai courts, and you should expect the Dubai courts to honor those court judgments. And that's our experience to date, our recent experience, our litigators doing exactly that on a regular basis. So, you know, if you're going to have the DIFC environment there as part of your corporate structure, obviously you've got to have regards to everything else underneath. I mean, where's the business? This goes to the question about, you know, can I have a DIFC holding structure with a Liechtenstein's foundation on top of it? I mean, the query is, why would you want to? You know, if you've got a onshore business with wealth derived from this region, and you want to, and you live and you are Emirati, or even if, you know, your life and, you know, your life's work is here, situate in the Dubai, in the UAE, what's Liechtenstein got to offer for you that you can't do in the DIFC? I would say very little. You know, you can do everything you can do there here, and it might be that you have to do it here because local ownership requirements, depending upon, you know, the nationality of the business and its owners, require you to have it situated in the UAE, and that local regulators, Dubai economy, for example, or whatever it is, depending upon what sort of business we're in, might require Emirati ownership. So the point is that the DIFC is a common law and well set up, well regarded, legal environment with its own infrastructure, with its own court system, but it's part of the local UAE environment. In that sense, it's unique, and that's why it offers, you know, is the optimal way, we say, for local businesses, local families looking to structure. It's a better option. Now, I'm not suggesting that if they've got external overseas assets, that they might want to structure that through a trust in Jersey or whatever they would ordinarily do, and that might make more sense depending upon the location of the assets. But conversely, you know, if the asset is here and you need to structure it in a way that respects that, then you can't go to Jersey necessarily. Or if you try to do it, you might end up, and this is even maybe more importantly, falling foul of the regulators or resulting in an unenforceable arrangement when disputes arise. So, I mean, the cabinet, sorry, go ahead, Noel, you want to say something?
Sorry, yes, I mean, I just want to add also a point to this, Richard, is that, you know, it's clear that Dubai Law number 16 of 2011 has provided that the DIFC courts have exclusive jurisdiction over any dispute involving an entity of the DIFC. And, you know, however, we note that the Joint Judicial Tribunal established pursuant to Dubai Decree number 19 of 2016 has the authority to decide which court should hear the dispute should claims be filed in both Dubai courts as well as the IFC courts. From its precedent, the Joint Judicial Tribunal has constantly found that cases involving DIFC entities should be heard by the DIFC courts, and also establish an expansive view of the Dubai Court's general jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing we can clear up for people, it's that, you know, the DIFC infrastructure and the wider, you know, legal infrastructure and jurisprudence gives weight, gives certainty to structures that are set up in the DIFC. You know, there should be no concern for families who are looking to structure through the DIFC in that regard. You know, the Dubai Law 14 of 2017, in our interpretation of that, is to give the same effect that WOCs have onshore, or the respect that they have as a means of making a distribution of assets that can be done in a way prior to the passing of the Muslim donor. You can do the same thing through a trust, and a DIFC trust is recognized specifically and mentioned. The DIFC is mentioned specifically in that law. And then I think maybe, you know, well, I mean, obviously we are not exactly where we want to be, but we definitely see a trend. We see, speaking as we do regularly to the regulators when we're looking to structure things for families, when we're having the conversation with the DLD and the DED, you know, we're definitely further advanced in their understanding, and that's really the key point, isn't it? Their understanding of what the DIFC represents and what these structures mean. Because I think in the past it's always been, like for everybody in the region who doesn't necessarily come across a trust or a foundation very often, it's that education piece, understanding how these things work, how these structures work, means that the regulators are now more willing and are accepting trusts, for example, and foundations, whereas previously they weren't.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we are seeing a very progressive approach by the regulators, specifically the Land Department, Dubai Land Department, in recognizing and becoming more familiar with structures, specifically trust structures in the DIFC.
I think we are basically, Khadija, and well, without realizing it, we're in the Q&A session, but I think that's a good thing. We sort of segued naturally into answering some of these questions. So the next one that we've just had, which is obviously very present and current, is how do the DIFC company and trust types interplay with the recent Dubai law on family business contracts? So as everyone knows, you know, or if they don't, there recently been enacted an onshore Dubai, Emirate of Dubai only law regulating the family property. It's a sort of, I mean, it looks like a new concept. Really what it is a contract that's in place. Noel and I did a session on this recently, and if anyone has any particular questions on it, we can always address those in more detail. It's not really the topic of this session, but as to how it interacts with them, I mean, it's quite distinct, really. I think the point is that's an onshore law that you would be using onshore if you wanted to put a contract in place between family members to regularize and hold some certain assets. I mean, we have our views on the law. I think for the purpose of this session today, talking about what the DIFC does, I think there are clear and obvious reasons why any sort of sophisticated structure or any significant wealth holding would be better served by an arrangement in the DIFC than by attempting to do everything in the form of what is a relatively straightforward contractual concept, which is what the family ownership law offers. It has its purpose, it has its uses, it has its place, but when we're talking about some of the things that we can do and the advantages that the DIFC gives, you know, it's chalk and cheese. I stick my neck out and say that. Can a DIFC foundation own property in Abu Dhabi, Nawal? That's one for you.
Well, foundations are relatively a new concept to this region, although they're initially based on the civil law. However, with foundations, because it has no members, it has no shareholders, authorities cannot trace, as they usually will, to the ultimate beneficial owners or the ultimate shareholders to ensure, and specifically this is relevant from a local UAE perspective. We have been meeting with the Abu Dhabi municipality in this regard, the Dubai Land Department. We are going through the educational process to determine how foundations will be treated and specifically the nationality thereof. Is it based on the founder's nationality or interested recipients? Unfortunately, I cannot give a definitive answer, but we are hoping that they will be soon accepted as a ownership vehicle for real property in Abu Dhabi. With regards to the Dubai Land Department, our understanding is that the Dubai Land Department is accepting foundations to own property directly for properties in freehold areas.
Maybe I can just add one more thing, Nawal. When it comes to Dubai Department, even for non-freehold area, actually, as DIFC, we're working with the Dubai Land Department, and hopefully even in the near future, the DIFC Foundation would be able to own wherever it is.
Great, thank you, Khadija. I think, you know, all regulators and authorities are recognizing the importance of having these structures in place and are working towards, you know, working positively towards basically accommodating for these structures.
We've had a question regarding economic substance rules and whether or how a foundation or prescribed company sits with those. I mean, I think the point is that, you know, if you have a business and you are requiring to meet certain economic substance requirements, then you might indeed need a physical office and staff. It's not a way of circumventing certain rules and regulations that are in place.
And maybe if I can just add one more thing, even for prescribed companies, because so many people, they confuse the DIFC prescribed companies with the SPVs in other jurisdictions. Usually in other jurisdictions, the SPVs are passive legal entity. They cannot even hire staff. While DIFC prescribed companies, although they enjoy the reduction in the licensing fee, as I mentioned earlier, they pay only $1,000 US. However, the prescribed companies in DIFC can have visas under them, can hire also staff. So even when it comes to ESR and adhering to the ESR regulation, the DIFC prescribed companies would be able to meet the requirements of substance. So there is nothing which will stop even the largest category of license in DIFC, which are classified as prescribed companies, from showing the required substance requirement. And not only that, as DIFC, what we have done to help the companies and family businesses, for family businesses which are in UAE with substantial presence in the country, as you know, when it comes to substance doesn't come on DIFC level, it is on UAE level, and hence, any family business with substantial presence in UAE will be able to establish prescribed companies in the center and actually to show that they have also substance. So the DIFC structures, we have taken that into consideration. Irrespective of the structure, all the different type of legal entities established in DIFC can hire staff and they will not have issue with substance.
Some more questions. We've got quite a few, so we'll try and answer them as quickly as we can in the time available. Can trust foundations be attacked by family members of benefits if benefits are not in accordance with Sharia principles? Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is you can attack anything. The issue, of course, is whether or not it's a successful challenge. No one can stop anyone trying to sue someone, and quite often people do for vexatious reasons, and then wish that they hadn't when they fail. Look, if you want to have a Sharia-compliant vehicle, it's because you respect the inheritance rules. And in doing so, you should expect that that would survive any challenge. If you are attempting to circumvent Sharia, then that's one of the key points that the personal status law provides against. And you should expect potentially that any disgruntled heir or heir attempting to assert their inheritance rights would be able to successfully challenge that. The DIFC is not a vehicle to avoid your requirements as to meet your inheritance obligations as a good Muslim, if I can put it that way. Question here, as Khadija said, non-freehold properties also could be owned by DIFC Foundation. So in this case, I'm assuming the members of the foundation would need to be Emiratis, not expatriates. Please clarify this. Again, yes, the DIFC is not an opportunity to circumvent ownership rules either. So if the property in question has to be held by Emiratis, then you would have a foundation with interested persons that are Emiratis. And in fact, there's actually a specific provision of the foundation's law that provides for exactly that and says that the charter and bylaws can provide that, if that is the case, that they have to be Emiratis. So that's actually been thought of when the foundation's law was formulated. Khadija, maybe a question for you. If structures come with strings attached, I'm not sure that's really a fair way of describing it. I think the point is we have rules and regulations in which these structures sit. But anyway, with regards to office requirements, considering prevailing economic situations, how does it fare when compared with ADGM? I mean, I think, Khadija, maybe the point is that the DIFC has a number of options, prescribed companies. I mean, ADGM is not that different. At the end of the day, it's also a financial free zone. I think you've got to think about what you're trying to achieve by setting up in one of, in DIFC or ADGM.
Yes, Richard, as I mentioned also earlier, when it comes to DIFC, I mentioned that any type of companies or legal entities in DIFC would be able to hire staff. It's, the DIFC structures, including the PCs, are not passive legal entity. They can have staff, and actually what we have done, given the market condition now, we created an ecosystem, including co-working space, where family businesses and holding companies can have dedicated desk, for their staff. So we're trying to see the market condition, and as DIFC, we are providing the clients and entities in the center with the most optimal and feasible options given the market condition. So I hope this answers the question.
Can a prescribed company have external shareholders who are not considered qualified applicants?
Absolutely. Please, do you want to go ahead, Richard?
Well, no, Khadija, I was going to say, there are types of qualified applicants who can set up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that going forward, you're restricted as to who the shareholders can be.
Absolutely. Actually, when it comes to prescribed companies and establishing it, either qualifying applicants, they can create those kind of establishment, or whoever have qualifying purpose. When it comes to shareholding, not necessarily the qualifying applicant should own 100% the legal entities. Some of the qualifying applicant, actually, for example, the financial authorized firms, they are ultimately not the owner of the legal entity. The owner would be the investors or their clients. However, if we are talking about family businesses, the prescribed companies actually can be the qualifying applicant as long as they majority own or control the legal entity. So they can have shareholders who are not family members or not DIFC entities. So the DIFC prescribed company can act also as a JV, if that answers the question. And we can have shareholders who are not also the qualifying applicant.
Yeah. And look, I think that's maybe a good point to end. I think that's the last question that we've got to answer. But generally, I think what that points to really, Khadija, is just the flexibility of the DIFC environment in being able to provide for whatever structure you need. There is a way that you can most probably do it, as long as you're not breaking the rules somewhere else. And specifically with regards to family businesses, as I said at the very beginning of the session, every family is very distinct, unique. but there's always a way of structuring what needs to be done in order to ensure that the family business survives. Sorry, we just had another question. It survives and prospers, of course. Will the DIFC or Al-Tamimi avail preliminary educational material that can be shared with eligible families to initial the process? Look, this is a sort of overview of what's available. You know, at the end of the day, every client, every business family that comes to Khadija, that comes to us, is specific. We would want to, of course, further educate those families and make them feel like perhaps the DIFC is a good opportunity and a good avenue for them to explore further. And so in doing that, yes, of course, we're here to help in all ways people better understand the legal environment and specifically, you know, what the DIFC can offer. So I think the answer to that is yes. You let us know what you need if you have an issue that you want to address with either of us. Our contact details are on this slide in front of you, and we'd be very happy to speak to you specifically and in person, or at least over the internet at the moment, if that's the best what we can manage. Khadija, Nawal, I think that's it in terms of open questions. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully it's been a useful session and you've learned something, or it's clarified something that you weren't clear about. And as I said, any further questions, any help that we can give, please do reach out to us. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.